there was always that little voice in my head telling me, well, what if that voice, it's small, but it's powerful. That voice kept me from following my gut, my intuition, maximizing every opportunity presented to me. That has been a recurring theme for me. Doubt will leave you unhappy. And so if you can learn to persevere through that, that's when you become the best version of yourself. Failure is just a part of the process. Trying to get myself and people to acknowledge that fear, but not be paralyzed by it. That is how you become successful, is failing first. You don't just succeed and keep succeeding. You fail and then you succeed and then probably fail again and then you succeed some more, right? That's just how the process works. And so I would love people to get that kind of big picture.
Hey everyone, this is Rod Cade and welcome to this week's episode of Rocket Motivation. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Gat Creek, a furniture manufacturer making and designing incredible wood furniture, all in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. Check out gatcreek.com. This week's guest is a lawyer practicing in Cleveland, Ohio. He's going to tell his story of his path to becoming a lawyer, being a lawyer, and what he has learned along the way. His past gave him issues of self-doubt, which he has overcome and will talk about. I'm excited for you to hear his story of success and overcoming. 3, 2, 1. Eric Foster, welcome to Rocket Motivation.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, let me first tell the listeners how I found you, Eric. I'm down in Mobile, you're up in Cleveland, and I was reading our Sunday paper, and there was an article in there that you wrote that was reprinted in the Mobile paper from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which your paper up there, and the title was "Keep on Dreaming with Help from the Benefits of a Doubt." And so I just thought, man, I got to get this guy on the show. And, we've connected and here we are. So, man, it's a thrill for me to have you on. Let's start with, why don't you tell the listeners kind of where you are today in your life, your career, family, kind of catch us up on where you are currently.
Well, where I am now is I have several different hats that I wear. So I'm currently an attorney here in Cleveland. I have a general practice, meaning I do all kinds of cases. I do both criminal and civil cases, meaning cases about money. And so I've been doing that for about 7 years now. I've also write for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is our local newspaper here in Cleveland. I've been writing a column for that paper for about a year and a half now. I've been blessed, been really blessed. My wife is up here. She's a principal. She runs a school. Yeah, we're both working and really extremely blessed given where we both came from.
And Eric, how old are you?
I am 37 years old.
So let's go back, Eric. So I know, the show's going to be about, mainly about self-doubt. Let's start about talking about your upbringing and, how that played a role in developing issues of self-doubt.
I was born in Warren, Ohio, which is about an hour east of Cleveland. However, I was raised in a lot of different cities and states. So we lived in San Diego when I was very young. That was the first place we moved to. My mother and my aunts and uncles, we all packed up a couple cars and drove out to San Diego to start new life. And so we lived in San Diego, moved all around Southern California, lived in places like Santa Clarita, which is just outside of Los Angeles. Also moved back near Ohio, lived in Bloomington, Indiana, lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. And so I've been all around as my mother had me and my older sister, who was a year older than me. She had us young. She was 19 when she had my sister and 20 when she had me. And so as a young person who didn't have a degree, we watched her go through the whole collegiate process, getting her degree, getting jobs that come along with the degree. And so we moved all around as she kind of moved up the ladder.
Okay, well, and let's talk about your father and tell us about kind of your first memory of your father.
So my first memory of my father is a troublesome one. When I was about 4 years old, one day my father came home really early in the morning and my mother had pushed the couch against the door. We were living in San Diego at the time. We had an apartment that we shared, me, my sister, my mom, and my dad. And my mom had pushed the couch to the front door and she was sitting on the couch and I could hear my father banging to get into the home. He was saying, let me in. What's going on? This is crazy. And, I'm a kid. I'm looking at my mom like, what's going on? And she's, shaking her head saying, don't worry about it. Everything's all right. And just like that, it wasn't all right. My dad was strong enough to break in the door, and that turned into a pretty lengthy scene involving a lot of violence. Saw him, rough roughing my mother up all around the house, from the kitchen to the living room. And she managed to grab me and my sister, take us into our bedroom, and she tried to, hold herself against the door. And he broke that door down too, and proceeded to beat her some more. And she managed to get a phone and call the police. And as soon as they picked up, he snatched the phone out of the wall. And you know how 911 works. If you call, they'll send somebody out if they keep calling back and nobody comes. So I mean, maybe about 15, 20 minutes later, a couple of sheriffs showed up, and found my dad wailing away at her, and they yanked him out of the apartment. Took two of them, yelled, dragged him out of there kicking and screaming. And that was the first memory I have of my dad. And I didn't see him for some time after that because he was incarcerated related to that criminal offense. So it started off rough, shall we say.
Well, and then so why don't you go and kind of take us through then, the relationship that you did have with your father as you're growing up, but also kind of tell us how, the relationship you had with your mother also, with all that, kind of going on at the same time.
So it was an interesting dichotomy, shall we say. So with my father, my relationship was, he really wasn't involved. So, like I said, the incident happened when I was 4. I didn't see him again until I was 15. I was a freshman in high school, and he had, proclaimed to my mother that he had cleaned his life around. My dad was an alcoholic, and so the incident arose out of his alcoholism. And so my mother was someone who didn't drink at all, and her dad was an alcoholic, so that was not something that she tolerated very much. And so my dad had proclaimed he had, solved his alcoholism, and my mother, offered him the chance to come live with us again. That was the next time I saw him when I was 15 at that time. And, I hadn't had my dad for 10 years. So I wanted to be around my dad. All my other friends had a dad. And so, I was really excited about the opportunity. There was somebody out there who was like me, and so it was a good time for me. My sister was very different. She did not want him around at all and did not believe anything he said. But I just was so happy that there was, another man in the house. We could talk about sports, and, we could play video games and do all those things that guys do, right? And so that was great for me. But, that time also ended again with another alcoholic incident. Came home drunk and, didn't get to violence, but my mother had called the cops early enough. And so that's when that ended. But I would say the issues with my dad affected my relationship with my mom in a way. So I'm almost a spitting image of my dad. So I look just like him, right? And so, there would often be times where it felt like the anger my mother had was, I guess, heightened. She would say things, you're like your dad, you're being like your dad. Whenever I did something negative, it was like, you're being like, this person that, doesn't want to be around you, doesn't, take care of his family. So that created some issues, in our relationship. I think is that, I think in some ways my presence reminded my mother on a daily basis of, the harm that my dad had caused her. That definitely
Right.
has some complications.
Right. And then also, and you already alluded to this, you guys moved around a lot growing up. How did the moving around, kind of the constant uprooting and going to a new place, how did that affect you?
So for me, it affected me tremendously. That's stuff that I still deal with now as a 37-year-old. For kids, a lot of adults don't necessarily realize, adults say kids are resilient, but, kids remember things, and moving was a traumatic thing for me at every instance, because I had friends, I had friends who I wanted to be like, and, I was very involved in sports. Basketball was my thing. And so, I'd always make friends through sports. And so it seemed like every time I got some friends, I'd have to leave and go somewhere else and try to make more friends or different friends. And so that was, for me, a very traumatic recurring theme in my childhood that, kind of hurt my ability to form deep relationships with people, because they were subconsciously, people were kind of, moving pieces. They'd be here one day, then go on the next day, and not, a lot of people have those long lasting relationships. Someone they know since kindergarten or preschool. And I don't have that at all. My longest friends are people I met like my senior year in high school, so that's just definitely something that affected me deeply.
And so, but I know you go to college at Morehouse in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
And tell us about that experience, and how that affected you.
Morehouse was a great time for me. So before Morehouse, my mother had, I told you she was moving around and getting promoted and going different jobs and taking different positions. She had always tried to put me and my sister in the best public school she could find, right? So if it was us finding some, one bedroom apartment we could all fit in just to get in the district, right? My mother would do that. Coincidentally enough, a lot of those districts, were majority white, right? So a lot of them, were not filled with a lot of people that look like me. And so that was something that I didn't have a lot of growing up. I would get people that look like me, at church or going to the park, something like that, but not in my school everyday education. And so Morehouse was the first place that I had seen where there were a lot of people who looked like me and thought like me, right? Who cared about learning things, who cared about bigger issues than them. And so that was something that I had never seen before. To be honest, most of the people that look like me that I knew were on TV, either basketball stars like everyone looked up to, like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, all those guys, but there was no one that ran a business. There was no one that wore a suit, and so those are all things that I first discovered at Morehouse. I never even had a suit. Only suit I wore was on Easter. But then Morehouse made you get a suit. That was a thing for the school. Students had to have suits. And so it was definitely a life-changing experience for me.
Right. And so I know at some point, because we know you're a lawyer, you consider going to law school. Tell us about that thought process on, all right, I think I want to go to law school, and then actually going to law school. Take us through that.
It's funny that when I went to college, my mother was an electrical engineer. And so when I went to college, I was not that person who came in with a plan, right? I just knew I was going to college. I didn't know what I was going to study. So I just said, I'm going to major in computer engineering. I was like, that seems kind of, what successful people would do is, they make a bunch of money doing computers. Everybody likes computers. And so that was my original major. And so once I got deeper into it, you get to the calculus 3 and the trigonometry, and I was like, I don't like these numbers. This thing, these variables, this is not my thing. I don't know what my mom was thinking. That is not for me. And so at that point is when I decided to change my major to political science. And I had some professors who said, law school might be a thing that you can do. Not because, like everyone says, if you can argue, you go to law school. That wasn't my thing. It was really, I had a talent for writing. And so a lot of my professors was like, well, if you can write, you can be a pretty good lawyer. And so that was when I first started thinking about law school.
Well, did you have some doubts though before, actually applying to law school and going to law school? Did you have some doubts about it?
Absolutely. So people who are aware of Morehouse know that it is a feeder institution, shall we say, for law school and medical school. It's one of those schools in the country that graduate the most number of students who go into law school and medical school that are African American, right? So that's kind of a thing that they're known for. And so a lot of my classmates, junior, senior year, we're doing all those law school things, right? You prep for the LSAT, you take the LSAT, then you do that in your junior year. Your senior year, that's when you're doing all the applications, finalizing, where you're going to go and all that stuff. And for me, even though I had some professors who thought that, I might be all right at this, I honestly didn't think I was that good of a student to be a lawyer, right? I was, to be honest, a pretty middling student, so I was, let's say, an underachiever is what we'll call that, right? And so I quite honestly doubted that I could get into law school and be a lawyer. That wasn't something I really thought I could do. I didn't know anybody else that did it.
What do you think caused you to have that self-doubt about that?
My self-doubt kind of struggles started pretty early. Some kids believe they can do anything, right? Their parents tell them you can do anything, believe everything. If you can see it, you can achieve it, right? That just wasn't my childhood, right? So my mother worked a lot. So there wasn't a lot of that encouragement of you got good grades, your mother puts a sticker on the fridge and, the gold stars and all that stuff. That wasn't, how I grew up. And so, I think for me, I think everyone at a certain point experience moments where they doubt themselves. It's just some people are lucky enough to have people who can correct that during those times, right? Especially when you're young, children are, can be cautious, right? And so, sometimes they'll have a parent who can encourage them to overcome that, right? But I didn't have that, so that became my default. The doubt kept me safe, right? And so
right.
That was, for me, it kind of started very early with doubting, what I can do. I doubted my ability to make friends in a new place. That was also why it was traumatic, because I didn't know if I can do this thing again. I didn't know if I can go to another state and make the basketball team again. And I didn't know I can go somewhere else and do well in school again. And so it was those kind of early doubts that kind of kept going throughout my life, where I kind of avoided opportunities that I could have taken because I doubted myself.
Well, we know you overcome those doubts because you go to the University of Akron Law School, and you graduated in 2013, right?
Yes.
So, after the University of Akron, you graduate, you take the California bar. First of all, why were you taking the California bar?
So I took the California bar because I graduated from high school in California, and I had envisioned that when I was going to graduate law school, I would go back and be this hotshot lawyer in California. I was in Ohio, it's dreary, it rains a lot, it's cold, it's awful. California is where I want to go. That is it, right? And so that was my idea for taking the California bar, was I'm going to go home and live the life that I envisioned.
All right. Well, did you pass the California bar in your first try?
I did not. Missed it by 20
And
points, and it was embarrassing and awful and quite humbling, shall we say.
right. Okay. But so what did you do about that? Well, first of all, you can kind of explain, kind of what were you doing at the time work wise? What did you do to overcome that?
So when I graduated from law school, I was working here in Cleveland at the Cleveland Housing Court. And so that's a specialized court here in Cleveland that works specifically on landlord-tenant issues like renting, evictions, that kind of stuff, right? And so I had a job there as a clerk, and I talked with the judge of the court at the time that, hey, I'm going to take the California bar. That's what I want to do. And he was fine with that. He was very supportive. He said, okay, if that's what you want to do, then all right. And so everyone was very supportive at the court. You're going to take the bar. And I remember when I went out to take it, everyone got flowers and, care packages, that I could, eat when I'm studying in the hotel, like everyone does the night before the bar, even though you're not supposed to, right? And so I was all ready to go. And so when I took the bar, I didn't feel great about it. I'm not sure many people do feel great about it, but I got back. Everybody asked how you did. I'm like, I don't know. I think I did all right, And so when the results came back, that's why I said it was embarrassing and humiliating, because I really thought that that's what I was going to do. And so I remember, hanging my head down and trying to scrounge up the courage to go tell the judge that, hey, man, I blew it. I went to his office and he actually said, I heard already. And that just, made me feel better that I didn't have to say it. He said, I heard already. And so he said, it's fine. Brush yourself off and do it again. And so that's what I did. It was what I needed to hear in that moment. Because at that point, my thought was, you know what? I'm in Ohio. Let me just take the Ohio bar. California's the hardest bar in the country. So I hear, let me just take this Ohio one, get out the way. I got a job. I'll be fine. But he said, no, you need to go and do that thing again. And so that was the push that I needed. I dusted myself off and went ahead and took it again.
Right. And passed it.
I did. Hallelujah. Amen.
Isn't that important? Even though I know you've never practiced in California, though, but isn't that important to you that this is something you didn't pass the first time, and so just to prove to yourself that you could do it. How important was that?
That was extremely important for me. With those self-doubts. I didn't think I was going to be a lawyer. I didn't think law school was something that I could do. I do all that work in law school. I get out of law school and take this final last step to be a lawyer and fall on my face. So for anyone, that would be a humbling experience, but especially for someone like me who struggles with self-doubt, that was really a moment that shook me to my core, because I was like, did I even make the right decision? I just spent 3 years of doing this thing. I spent all this time studying, paid money to fly all the way across the country to go take this thing. What was I doing? It was important to me that I overcame that hurdle, because I knew if I passed that, then I could do Ohio. I could do something else. That it was just getting through that door initially.
And so I know you take the Ohio bar, pass it, and so you're working
Yes.
in Ohio as a lawyer. But at some point, you think about starting your own practice. Now, tell us about that and what kind of self-doubt you had on striking out on your own.
Well, when I was in Ohio and I was working as a prosecutor, they allowed us as prosecutors to use our flex time if we were, on our work to start our own practice on the side so we can do our own work. And so that was where I started a civil practice, doing like personal injury stuff, doing that on the side. And so I started that as a prosecutor and was doing relatively well. I could supplement my salary pretty well doing that other kind of work. And I thought about, well, maybe I need to just go ahead and jump out of this thing and do what I think I'm good at. I was making good money and, I wanted to work for myself and generate my own business and, be this businessman kind of thing. But there was always that little voice in my head telling me, well, what if it doesn't work out, right? I mean, well, what if, you leave the prosecutor's office, whenever you leave the office, they throw this big party. And then 6 months later, I'm like, hey guys, so my job's still available? Anybody got any positions in there? I wondered if, that would happen to me. And so that voice, held me back for an extended period of time, 4 years, actually. Now that I'm out doing it, I should have done it when I first thought about it. But, that voice, it's small, but it's powerful. That voice kept me from following my gut, my intuition.
Well, and let me ask you this. I mean, so how would you say that having this self-doubt as an overarching theme, how has it affected your life?
So I don't want to say I have regrets. I'm only 37. I haven't lived that long. My daughter will tell me I'm old, but I know I'm not that old, right? Mm-hmm. But what I do know is that my self-doubts have kept me from maximizing every opportunity presented to me, right? Or taking advantage of every opportunity presented to me. That has been a recurring theme for me. And that's what honestly compelled me to write that column that you read, was that this doubt held me back, even though I'm doing very well right now. I cannot complain, but I know that I could be doing better, right? If I had turned that voice off, if I had said, well, doubt is normal. Let me just go ahead and try it anyways. That has been a recurring theme.
Would you equate self-doubt to fear of failure?
In a lot of ways. I think fear of failure is certainly the most compelling aspect, I think, of self-doubt. I think there's also a fear of, putting yourself out there, possibly being embarrassed. The fear of whatever it is not working out really is at its core the fear of failure, like you suggest. That really is what most of us fear. I wouldn't say the most, but it's high up there. You don't want to try something and it not work out.
You are where you are now. You've got a great practice in Cleveland. Looks like everything's going pretty well. So how have you, or have you, overcome the self-doubt that you've had throughout your life?
I'll never say I've overcome it. Well, at least not at this point yet. I don't think I have quite flexed that muscle enough to have overcome it. But what I would say is I think that as I get older, it's much more intentional to move despite that voice, right? I think it's kind of like a continuum. I think doubt is normal, and accepting that was the first step, right? Just accepting that doubting doesn't mean you're crazy, right? It's just part of life. I think that the next step is that voice gets quieter and quieter. The doubt is something that you can shift and move around and manipulate and quite frankly dismiss at a certain point when you get so used to doing that. And so I know for me, a driver has been my daughter. I don't want her to have the same issues that I have, so I try to be the encourager for her, and I try to live like I want her to see. I try to do things that, I might suck at it. I might totally blow it. It might be the worst thing ever, but I'll try it anyways, because that's who I want to be and who I want my daughter to be. And so that's really been something for me that has helped me focus on that.
Right. Well, let me ask you, all right, so, and this is kind of the big question. What advice would you give to the listeners who are going through self-doubt or a fear of failure? And not, I don't mean just kind of like, I mean, everybody has doubt, but I mean, like kind of a paralyzing self-doubt, where you're just not going to do something because you're so afraid that you're going to fail at it. I mean, going through what you've been through in your life and the successes that you've now have had, what advice would you give the listeners?
So what I would say is there's this quote from Winston Churchill that I love. Someone told it to me when I failed the California bar, and it kind of stuck with me. And so this quote goes, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." Right. And so that to me really kind of sums up, I guess, the mantra that I want to have for life, right? Is that failure is just a part of the process. And anyone who's successful can tell you something that they failed at, right? Anybody I've ever met who's accomplished anything has failed, right? And so it's trying to get myself and people to acknowledge that fear, but not be paralyzed by it. That is how you become successful, is failing first. You don't just succeed and keep succeeding. You fail and then you succeed and then probably fail again and then you succeed some more, right? That's just how the process works. And so I think it's, I would love people to get that kind of big picture about how this really works.
Yeah. And I guess one of the problems is, with some people, if they initially fail, that they can't get over it. You got to be able to fail and move on. Another part of that is, you almost have to be able to laugh at yourself. I mean, if you take yourself so seriously that if you fail at something, you're so embarrassed, you're so shut down that you can't move on. And I mean, what's your thoughts on kind of the being able to kind of, step back and laugh at yourself a little bit?
I mean, having a sense of humor is really required for, I would say, life in general. What's that saying? Nobody gets out alive, so you might as well, not take it serious anyways, right? I think we tend to, see ourselves as bigger and more important than what other people see. When we fail, we think everybody saw it. If you go in a room and you fell down, you think like everybody's all worried about you, but that's really not the case. It's really not. It's so much more important to you than it is to a passerby or someone who doesn't know you. So I think people tend to think that failure can kind of stick with them like a badge of dishonor or something, and that's really not how it works.
Yeah. And I completely agree with what you're saying. And is that, none of us are as important as we think we are. That's part of that. And so like, if you fail at something, you think, oh my gosh, everybody's looking at me. Well, the truth of the matter is most people don't care.
Not at all.
You're putting more of that pressure on yourself than it really matters. But, well, Eric, I tell you what, I always do this with my guests. I always like to give them the parting shots. You've had have had great life experiences, ups and downs and failures and success, mostly success for you. What can you leave with the listeners?
So I think what I would leave with the listeners is go with your first thought, right? Go with your first intuition. When you have an idea, pursue that idea. When you think you can do something, just do it. The life is too short. There's no reason to talk yourself out of something, because you got it for a reason. That idea came to you for a reason. That thing that you think nobody else thought of came to you for a reason. And so if you don't do it, then you're not presenting your best self to the world. And it might be the thing that makes you unique, might make you a millionaire, might make you, the most popular person, that thing that you're talking yourself out of. On the other side of that doubt is your actual happiness. And so I think that's what I would like to leave with people is, that doubt will leave you unhappy. And so if you can learn to persevere through that, that's when you become the best version of yourself.
Eric, I can't tell you how thrilled I am and how honored I am to have had you on my podcast. This has been a great episode, and I'm so glad I picked up the paper and read it that day, and got your name. And and thank you so much for getting back with me and agreeing to come on my podcast.
The honor is mine. I've never, like I said, I've never done one of these things before. So, I mean, this is totally new and you made it enjoyable. And so I thank you for the opportunity. Again, I'm just a writer who wrote something and it happened to show up in the Alabama paper. But I mean, God works in mysterious ways. I'm glad we had this conversation.
Well, and one thing about this podcast about Rocket Motivation is we don't have guests on the show that are famous people or professional podcasters. This is what we get regular people, normal people that have just had some issues in their life that they've overcome to give advice to the average person, and that's what makes this so good, I think.
Yes, you're doing a tremendous service. I think people need. You can't have too much motivation. You really can't. You can't have too many people that are speaking life into people. And so I think you're doing a good job of that, and I want to applaud you for it.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Rob.
What a great episode with Eric Foster. And it was great listening to his story of dealing with self-doubt in his life, something we've all dealt with. Episode 27 of Rocket Motivation is in the books. Next week's guest is Carrie Benson. She is the mother of a severely autistic son, and she'll tell her story of the trials and tribulations of raising her son and how she has used what she has been through to start an organization of helping special needs individuals participate in dance classes. It's going to be a great episode. See you next week. Rocket Motivation partners with Gat Creek, one of America's premier wood furniture makers. Clean, timeless designs define the Gat Creek look. Their made-to-order furniture effortlessly connects with a range of styles from modern to traditional. Check out their full range of products at gatcreek.com. If you're interested in getting my book, Get Back Up, just go to Amazon and put in Get Back Up and my name, Rod Caden. It'll pop right up. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it if you'd share it with a friend. I would like as many people to hear my message as possible. Never give up and always get back up. And we'll see you next week.